I stared at Miranda across her glass desk, my hands shaking. 3 days ago, I buried my mother. Today, my boss was firing me. Your toxic attitude is affecting the entire team, Miranda said, sliding the termination papers toward me. Her red nails tapped against the desk like tiny hammers. You've been creating conflict where none existed. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Creating conflict? All I did was flag some suspicious vendor charges to HR. Numbers that didn't add up. Invoices that seemed way too high for basic supplies. I don't understand, I whispered. I was just doing my job. Miranda's smile was ice cold. She stood up, smoothing down her designer suit. The same suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. As I gathered my things from my desk, she leaned close to my ear. Her perfume was overwhelming, like she was trying to cover up something rotten underneath. Next time, stay in your lane, she whispered. I felt my face burn with shame. My coworkers wouldn't even look at me as security walked me out. 20 minutes later, I sat in my car in the parking lot, holding my cardboard box of belongings and wondering what just happened. 2 months earlier, everything was different. I was still grieving Dad's death, but work felt like a safe place. I kept my head down, did my job, and tried not to think about how empty the house felt. That Tuesday morning, I was reviewing vendor records like always. Boring stuff, office supplies, cleaning services, maintenance contracts. Numbers that should make sense but somehow didn't. Chase Procurement Solutions kept showing up. Their invoices were always higher than other vendors. Way higher. A box of pens that cost $30 elsewhere was $60 from them. Cleaning supplies that ran $1,500 when the market rate was $800. I pulled up 3 months of records. The pattern was everywhere. This vendor was charging double, sometimes triple what competitors charged for the same items. And every single invoice had Miranda's signature approving it. I printed everything out, organized it by date, and highlighted the differences. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe Miranda just wasn't paying attention to the details. I walked to HR that afternoon, my stomach tight with nerves. I knocked on the door and handed over my folder. I think there might be some billing errors, I said quietly. The HR manager barely looked at my evidence before closing the folder. Just standard vendor practices, she said with a dismissive wave. After my meeting with HR, everything changed. It was like someone flipped a switch. Within a week, I was removed from the client calls I'd been handling for 2 years. Miranda said it was for restructuring purposes. My daily reports were reassigned to other team members. Projects I'd worked on for months suddenly didn't need my input anymore. My desk was moved to the far corner of the office, away from everyone else. When I tried to join conversations at lunch, people would get quiet and find excuses to leave. It was like I had some contagious disease. The worst part was the silence. Nobody told me what I'd done wrong. Nobody explained why I was being pushed out. I just had to sit there, watching my career disappear piece by piece. I started eating lunch in my car instead of the break room. The isolation was crushing. These were people I'd worked with for 3 years. We used to talk about our weekends, share pictures of our kids, complain about the coffee machine together. Now they looked through me like I was invisible. One Thursday, I walked past Miranda's office and saw my printed email about the vendor charges sitting on her desk. My name was highlighted in yellow marker. My stomach dropped to my shoes. She knew exactly what I'd tried to do. I couldn't sleep anymore. Every morning felt like walking into enemy territory. I started keeping a notebook, writing down every strange interaction, every meeting I was excluded from, every time someone treated me differently. The notebook filled up fast. One afternoon, I was walking past the conference room when I heard Miranda's voice through the door. She was talking to the department head, their voices just loud enough for me to catch a few words. "This one's a liability," Miranda said. "I'm clearing her out." My blood turned to ice. I pressed closer to the door, pretending to organize papers at the copy machine. "How long do you think it'll take?" the department head asked. "Not long. I'm building a case." I hurried back to my desk, my heart pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. A case? What kind of case? 2 days later, I got my answer. An email from HR requesting a meeting to discuss my workplace behavior and concerns from management about creating a hostile work environment. I read the email 3 times, each time feeling more confused and angry. Hostile work environment? I was the one being isolated and ignored. I was the one whose work was being taken away without explanation. That night I called my best friend and cried for an hour. Nothing made sense anymore. I decided to dig deeper into Chase Procurement Solutions. If I was going down, I wanted to understand why. Public records were online and free to search. I spent my lunch breaks in the library, using their computers to look up business registrations, ownership documents, anything I could find. What I discovered made my hands shake. Chase Procurement Solutions was owned by someone named Rebecca Chase. But when I cross-referenced the address and phone number, I found something else. Rebecca Chase was also listed as Rebecca Williams in an old marriage certificate from 15 years ago. Williams. Miranda's last name before she got married was Williams. I dug deeper. Social media photos showed Rebecca at family gatherings with someone who looked exactly like Miranda. Birthday posts calling each other sister. Wedding photos with both women in matching bridesmaid dresses. Chase Procurement wasn't just overcharging the company. It was Miranda's sister's company. Miranda was approving inflated invoices and sending money directly to her own family. I printed everything and put it in a folder. This wasn't just bad vendor management. This was fraud. The next morning, I requested another meeting with HR. This time, I brought proof. The HR manager looked through my documents with a frown that got deeper with each page. "You're opening a door you don't understand," she said finally. "I suggest you drop this before it goes too far." A week later, I was called into Miranda's office and handed a performance improvement plan. The requirements were vague and impossible to measure. Better communication with team members. Improved attitude toward company policies. More collaborative approach to problem solving. If I failed to meet these standards within 60 days, I would be terminated for non-compliance. I read through the document twice, looking for anything specific I could actually work on. There was nothing. It was designed to fail. "Do you have any questions?" Miranda asked, her voice sweet as poison. I shook my head and signed the papers. What choice did I have? The next month passed in a blur of walking on eggshells. I double-checked every email before sending it. I smiled until my face hurt. I volunteered for extra projects that nobody wanted. Nothing helped. Miranda found fault with everything I did. Then Mom got sick. Really sick. The doctors wanted to run more tests, but she needed someone to drive her to appointments and stay with her during treatments. I submitted a request for family medical leave. The paperwork was perfect. I checked the employee handbook 3 times. Miranda denied it the same day. "Current workload doesn't allow for extended absences," the rejection letter said. "Consider adjusting your personal schedule to accommodate work requirements." My mother was dying, and my boss was worried about workload. Mom passed away on a Tuesday morning. I held her hand as she took her last breath, promising her I'd be okay, even though I wasn't sure that was true anymore. I took 3 days off for the funeral. I didn't ask permission. I just sent an email and turned off my phone. When I came back to work, Miranda was waiting at my desk with a security guard. "You violated the terms of your performance plan," she said, holding up a printed copy of my absence. "Unauthorized leave during your probationary period constitutes non-compliance with company policies." The security guard stood there like I was dangerous. Other employees pretended to work while watching the show. "My mother died," I said quietly. "Company policy doesn't make exceptions for personal emergencies." Miranda replied, "You should have planned better." I packed my things while everyone stared. Personal photos, my coffee mug, the stress ball my dad had given me years ago. Everything that made this place feel like home was suddenly just junk in a cardboard box. As I walked toward the exit, someone slipped a folded piece of paper into my hand. I didn't look to see who it was. In my car, I unfolded the note. It was from Janet, one of the older accountants who'd always been kind to me. "You were right. Watch your email tonight." At 11:47 p.m., I received an email from an anonymous account. No message, just a link to a shared folder. My hands trembled as I clicked it open. Screenshots. Dozens of them. Email chains between Miranda and someone named Rebecca. Invoice approvals with timestamps. Spreadsheets showing vendor payments over 3 years. But the most damning evidence was a document titled Procurement Adjustments with Miranda's digital signature. It showed side-by-side comparisons of market rates versus Chase Procurement's charges. The differences were highlighted in red. She knew exactly what she was doing. One spreadsheet showed the total amount of money that had been funneled through the fake vendor scheme. Over 18 months, Chase Procurement had received nearly $200,000 in inflated payments. Another document showed Miranda personally approving duplicate charges across different departments. The same box of office supplies ordered 3 times in 1 month, each time at an inflated rate. My firing wasn't about my attitude or creating conflict, it was about covering up theft. I spent the entire night reading through everything, taking my own screenshots, saving copies to multiple drives. This was evidence of fraud on a massive scale. By morning, I knew exactly what I had to do. But first, I needed a job. Nobody was going to believe the word of a terminated employee with no income and no credibility. The next 2 months were the darkest of my life. I applied to 63 jobs. I got 4 interviews and 0 offers. Every rejection felt like proof that Miranda had won, that speaking up had been a mistake, that staying in my lane would have kept me safe and employed. I started to wonder if I was losing my mind. Maybe I had been creating conflict. Maybe I deserved what happened. Maybe successful people like Miranda knew things I didn't understand. My savings account got smaller every week. I canceled Netflix, switched to cheaper groceries, avoided going anywhere that cost money. My world shrunk down to job applications and rejection emails. Then, on a Thursday morning, my phone rang. "Is this Kimberly?" The voice was professional but warm. "This is Alex from Hartwell Industries. We received your resume through a recruiter." I nearly dropped the phone. Hartwell Industries was Miranda's biggest competitor. They handled government contracts and major corporate accounts. Everyone in the industry knew their name. "We need a senior coordinator urgently," Alex continued. "Would you be available for an interview tomorrow?" I said yes before he finished the question. The interview went better than I dared to hope. They needed someone who understood vendor management and procurement processes. Someone who paid attention to details and wasn't afraid to ask questions. "When can you start?" asked the hiring manager. "Monday," I said immediately. Hartwell Industries felt like stepping into a different world. People said good morning and meant it. Meetings started and ended on time. Nobody whispered in corners or excluded team members from important discussions. My new manager, Elise, was everything Miranda wasn't. She listened when I spoke, explained decisions clearly, and trusted me to do my job without micromanaging every detail. For the first month, I kept my head down and focused on learning their systems. I didn't want to cause any trouble or give anyone a reason to doubt my hiring. But old habits die hard. I couldn't help noticing vendor patterns and checking invoice details. It was just how my brain worked. One afternoon, I was reviewing a project file when a familiar name jumped out at me. Chase Procurement Solutions. My stomach lurched. They were here too. A contract for cleaning supplies and maintenance materials, signed just 3 months ago, the same inflated pricing structure I'd seen at my old company. I pulled up their invoices and compared them to our other vendors. The pattern was identical. $60 pens, $800 cleaning supplies, maintenance contracts that cost twice the market rate. My first instinct was to stay quiet. Mind my own business. Stay in my lane. But I couldn't forget the night my mother died. How Miranda had stood over my desk with security, talking about company policy while my heart was breaking. Some things are more important than staying safe. I spent 2 weeks quietly researching Chase Procurement's relationship with Hartwell Industries. I was careful not to access anything I wasn't supposed to see or ask questions that might raise red flags. What I found was disturbing. The same inflated pricing structure as my old company, but on a much larger scale. Hartwell was a bigger company with a bigger budget, which meant bigger fraud. Over 6 months, Chase Procurement had billed nearly $400,000 for supplies and services that should have cost half that amount. But there was something else. Cross-referencing the approval signatures, I noticed a pattern. A manager named Thomas had signed off on most of the Chase Procurement contracts. The same Thomas who'd been promoted to regional director just 2 months ago. I started to wonder how many other companies Miranda was targeting. One morning, Elise stopped by my desk with coffee and a concerned expression. "You've been working late a lot," she said. "Everything okay?" I looked at her honest face and made a decision. "Can we talk privately?" I asked. In her office, I explained everything. My old job, the vendor fraud, my termination, and what I'd discovered at Hartwell. I showed her my documentation and the evidence I'd collected. Elise listened without interrupting, taking notes and asking clarifying questions. "This is serious," she said finally. "If you're right, we're talking about systematic fraud across multiple companies." She looked at me directly. "Are you willing to help us investigate this, off the record, until we know more?" I thought about my mother, about the promise I'd made to be okay. Sometimes being okay means fighting back. "Yes," I said. Working with Elise felt like having a partner instead of a boss. We met early in the mornings and stayed late in the evenings, building a case that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. I used my insider knowledge of Miranda's methods to identify red flags in our own vendor relationships. Elise used her access to contracts and financial records to verify my suspicions. Within a week, we had confirmation. Chase Procurement Solutions was listed as owned by Rebecca Chase, but the business registration showed the same address as Rebecca Williams from my original research. Miranda's sister was running the same scam at Hartwell Industries, but we needed more. One company could be explained away as coincidence. We needed to prove this was a pattern. I reached out to former colleagues who'd moved on to other companies, casual conversations about vendor management and procurement practices. Most people were happy to complain about overpriced suppliers and inefficient contracts. 3 companies mentioned Chase Procurement by name. Same pricing structure, same approval processes, same suspicious circumstances. Miranda wasn't just stealing from her employer. She was running a multi-company fraud scheme, moving from job to job and installing her sister's fake vendor at each stop. One morning, I got a text from an unknown number. "Heard Miranda is sniffing around again. Something's coming." It was Janet, my old coworker, who'd sent me the evidence folder. Miranda was making moves. We were running out of time. I didn't want to go to the media. I'd seen what happened to whistleblowers who made noise. They got labeled as troublemakers and struggled to find work. Plus, I had no proof that reporters would believe a story from someone who'd been fired for performance issues. Instead, I focused on building an airtight case that could speak for itself. I documented everything in a professional report with timelines, financial records, and cross-company analysis. Every claim was backed up with evidence. Every number was verified through multiple sources. The report showed the full scope of Miranda's scheme. 5 companies over 3 years, with total fraudulent billing exceeding $1.2 million. Her sister's fake vendor was systematically overcharging for basic supplies, while Miranda moved from company to company, installing the same scam everywhere she went. Most importantly, I showed how the scheme worked. Miranda would get hired in a procurement or management role, then gradually shift vendor contracts to Chase Procurement. She'd approve inflated invoices without competitive bidding, and the money would flow directly to her sister's company. Elise reviewed my report twice before nodding her approval. "This is bulletproof," she said. "Professional, detailed, and impossible to dismiss." We submitted the report to Hartwell's internal audit team and copied their legal department. No press releases, no social media campaigns, no dramatic confrontations. Just the truth, presented clearly and backed up with facts. Hartwell's audit team moved fast. Within 48 hours, all contracts with Chase Procurement were frozen pending review. The company's accounting department was instructed to flag any invoices from the vendor and route them through additional approval processes. But they kept everything quiet. No announcements, no company-wide emails, no indication that anything unusual was happening. From the outside, it looked like business as usual. Elise called me into her office on Friday afternoon with an update. "The audit team found additional evidence," she said. "Your report led them to look at other vendor relationships, and they've identified 3 more suspicious contracts." My heart raced. How much money are we talking about? For Hartwell alone? Close to $600,000 over 18 months. I felt sick thinking about all that stolen money. How many employee bonuses were cut? How many important projects were delayed? How many people lost jobs because the company thought they couldn't afford proper staffing? But here's the thing, Elise continued. This just became bigger than us. The audit team is escalating this to the board of directors. She looked at me seriously. They want to involve federal authorities. This crosses state lines and involves multiple companies. It's not just internal fraud anymore. I thought about Miranda sitting in her corner office, probably planning her next move to another unsuspecting company. Not this time. For 2 weeks, nothing seemed to happen. Life went on at Hartwell like normal. People complained about coffee quality and parking spaces. Meetings ran long and projects fell behind schedule. Meanwhile, I watched industry news and social media for any sign that Miranda's world was cracking. What I saw made my heart sink. Miranda had been promoted. Regional oversight role at a major consulting firm, according to her LinkedIn profile. New headshots, congratulatory comments from colleagues, posts about being excited for new challenges. She looked successful and untouchable, like someone who'd never stolen a penny or destroyed anyone's career. I started to doubt myself again. Maybe powerful people really were different. Maybe they could do anything and face no consequences. Then I got another anonymous message. This time, it was a screenshot of an internal email. Miranda was trying to bring Chase Procurement into her new company as a preferred vendor for office supplies and facility management. The same scam starting all over again. I forwarded the screenshot to Elise with a simple message. She's doing it again. Elise called me an hour later. Pack your documentation, she said. We're going to the board meeting tomorrow. It was time to tell the whole story. The board meeting was in a conference room that felt like a courtroom. 12 people in expensive suits sitting around a table that probably cost more than my car. I'd prepared for this moment for weeks, but my hands still shook as I opened my laptop. Elise introduced me and explained how I'd uncovered the fraud scheme. Then she turned to me. Tell them what you found. I started with Miranda's behavior at my old company, the vendor irregularities, my attempts to report them, the retaliation and termination. Then I showed them the evidence I'd collected. The room was dead silent as I walked through the financial documents, the cross-company analysis, and the family connections between Miranda and the fake vendor. But the real moment came when I showed them my latest discovery. This isn't just about 2 companies, I said, clicking to my final slide. I've identified the same vendor fraud at 5 different companies over 3 years. Miranda moves from job to job, implements the same scheme, then moves on before anyone notices. I showed them the total financial impact, $1.8 million in fraudulent billing across 5 companies. The board members started asking sharp questions. How long had this been going on? How many other companies might be affected? What was the legal exposure? One member asked the question I'd been hoping for. Do we have enough evidence to stop this from happening again? I looked at Elise, who nodded encouragingly. Yes, I said, we do. 3 days later, I got a call I wasn't expecting. This is Angela Reeves, the voice said. I represent Miranda Williams. I understand you've been spreading false accusations about my client. My stomach dropped. Miranda had found out about the board meeting and was fighting back. I think there's been a misunderstanding, I said carefully. My client would like to meet with you to clear the air. She believes this situation can be resolved without involving lawyers or authorities. The offer sounded reasonable, but something felt wrong. Why would Miranda want to meet with me after having me fired and blacklisted? I called Elise and explained the conversation. Don't go alone, she said immediately. If you're going to meet with her, I'm coming with you. We agreed to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown with plenty of witnesses and security cameras. 2 days later, I sat across from Miranda for the first time since she'd fired me. She looked exactly the same, perfectly styled hair, expensive clothes, confident smile, but there was something different in her eyes. Desperation, maybe, or fear. You look good, she said, like we were old friends catching up. I heard you found a new position. Congratulations. I didn't respond. Elise sat beside me, taking notes and watching Miranda's every move. Miranda's smile faltered slightly. Look, I think there's been a misunderstanding about the vendor situation, she said. Sometimes accounting gets complicated, and numbers can be misinterpreted. The conversation went downhill fast. Miranda tried to play innocent at first, suggesting that vendor pricing was industry standard and that I'd misunderstood normal business practices. When that didn't work, she shifted to condescension. "You always were too focused on small details," she said. "Successful people understand that business involves relationships and trust, not just spreadsheets." I felt the old familiar anger rising in my chest, the same anger I'd felt when she fired me while I was grieving my mother. But I stayed calm. I had something Miranda didn't know about yet. Elise had been quiet through most of the meeting, just listening and taking notes. Finally, she looked up from her notepad. "Did you falsify any invoices, Miranda?" she asked simply. Miranda's carefully controlled expression cracked for just a second. "I don't know what you mean by falsify," she said. "Sometimes there are pricing adjustments based on market conditions and vendor relationships." "So you admit to approving inflated charges?" Elise pressed. Miranda's cheeks flushed red. "It was just rounding, standard business practice." Elise and I exchanged glances. Miranda had just confessed to fraud, and she didn't even realize it. "Just rounding," Elise repeated, writing it down. "Can you clarify what you mean by that?" But Miranda was already standing up, realizing she'd said too much. "This meeting is over," she snapped, grabbing her purse. "My lawyer will be in touch." She stormed out of the coffee shop, leaving Elise and me sitting at the table with the recording of her confession. Within a week, everything accelerated. The board of directors launched a formal investigation across all 5 companies Miranda had worked for. Financial auditors were brought in to examine vendor contracts and approval processes. Miranda was suspended from her new position, pending the outcome of the investigation. But she wasn't going quietly. I got a call from Elise on a Tuesday morning. Her voice was tense. "Miranda's hired a team of lawyers," she said. "They're claiming you fabricated evidence and that the whole thing is a personal vendetta because you were fired for poor performance." My blood ran cold. "Can they prove that?" "They're trying to shift blame to the company's internal controls and suggest that any pricing irregularities were approved by proper authority." It was smart legal strategy. Instead of denying the fraud, Miranda's lawyers were arguing that she had permission to approve whatever pricing she wanted. But I'd prepared for this. "I have documentation from my original HR complaint," I said. "Timestamps showing when I first identified the vendor issues, emails showing how I was retaliated against, and witness statements from other employees. I also had the recording from our coffee shop meeting where Miranda admitted to rounding charges. Plus," I added, "forensic auditors can verify that the invoices were altered after initial submission." "That's not pricing adjustments. That's document tampering." Elise was quiet for a moment. "Good," she said finally, "because they're demanding access to all our evidence. This is about to get very public." A month later, just when it seemed like the investigation was gaining momentum, everything stalled. A new director had been brought in to oversee the case. His first decision was to pursue internal resolution rather than external prosecution. Translation: they wanted to sweep everything under the rug. The director called me into his office on a Friday afternoon. He was young, polished, and spoke in corporate buzzwords that meant nothing. "We believe this situation represents internal miscommunication rather than intentional fraud," he said. "The company would prefer to handle this as a personnel matter rather than a legal issue." I stared at him in disbelief. "Personnel matter? We're talking about almost $2 million in stolen money." "Alleged financial irregularities," he corrected. "And the company has decided that pursuing this matter would be costly and time-consuming with uncertain outcomes." They were going to let Miranda walk away. I felt my face burning with anger, but I kept my voice steady. "I have documentation," I said quietly. "Original vendor contracts showing tampered entries, HR records from my termination, recorded admissions of guilt." I reached into my folder and pulled out the evidence I'd been saving for exactly this moment. "This isn't miscommunication," I said, sliding the documents across his desk. "This is systematic fraud, and I can prove it." The director's confident expression wavered as he flipped through my evidence. The tide was turning again. The forensic audit took 6 weeks and cost the company $40,000. It was worth every penny. The auditors found everything I'd predicted and more. altered invoices with digital signatures that didn't match the originals, email chains between Miranda and her sister discussing pricing adjustments and profit margins, bank records showing money flowing from Chase procurement to accounts linked to Miranda's family. Most damning of all, they found a spreadsheet on Miranda's work computer titled Revenue Optimization that laid out the entire fraud scheme, which companies to target, how much to overcharge, when to move on to the next victim. Miranda had been keeping records of her own crimes. The final audit report was 847 pages long and recommended immediate termination and criminal prosecution. 3 years of systematic fraud, $1.8 million in stolen money, 5 companies victimized, dozens of employees affected by budget cuts that were caused by inflated vendor costs. The evidence was overwhelming. On a Thursday morning, I got a call from Elise. "It's over," she said. "Miranda was terminated with cause this morning. Her pension is frozen, pending legal review. Chase Procurement has been blacklisted from all partner companies." I sat in my car in the parking lot and cried, not from sadness but from relief. Finally, someone had listened. Finally, the truth mattered more than corporate politics. That afternoon, the company's legal team offered me a settlement to keep the details confidential. I agreed, but with one condition. Miranda could never be hired by any company in their network ever again. 6 months later, my life looked completely different. I was promoted to head of compliance and ethics at Hartwell Industries. My job was to prevent exactly the kind of fraud Miranda had been running, examining vendor relationships, implementing oversight processes, and training managers to recognize red flags. It was meaningful work that made a real difference. Elise had become more than just my manager. She was a mentor and friend who'd stood by me when everything fell apart. "Not bad for someone who once got fired for being too honest," she said, helping me move into my new corner office. The office had windows that looked out over the city. On clear days, I could see the building where Miranda used to work, where I'd spent 3 years being ignored and undervalued. That afternoon, I got an unexpected email from my old company's HR department. "We've been reviewing personnel decisions from the past year," it said. "We should have listened to your concerns about vendor relationships. We hope you're doing well in your new position." It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was acknowledgement that I'd been right all along. I deleted the email without responding. Some bridges are better left burned. That evening, I called my best friend to share the news about my promotion. "Are you happy?" she asked. I looked around my new office, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The grief, the retaliation, the months of unemployment, the fear that speaking up had ruined my career. "Yes," I said, "I really am." A year later, I was reviewing a consulting contract when a familiar name appeared in my email. A company across town was asking for background checks on potential new hires. Standard procedure. They wanted to verify employment history and professional references. One of the names on the list was Miranda Chase. She was using her maiden name now, probably hoping to distance herself from the fraud investigation. Her resume showed a gap where her last position should have been, and her references were all from companies she'd worked for before the scandal broke. I pulled up the audit reports and legal documentation from her case. Everything was sealed under confidentiality agreements, but I had a professional obligation to provide accurate information about vendor fraud risks. I couldn't mention specifics, but I could make sure the hiring company understood what kind of background check they needed to run. I crafted a careful response. Given the financial nature of this position, I recommend conducting enhanced due diligence on vendor relationships and procurement processes. You may want to verify all employment history and check for any legal proceedings related to financial management. I attached a general information sheet about fraud prevention and vendor oversight best practices. 3 days later, I checked the company's website. Miranda's name had disappeared from their new team members page. I never heard anything official, but I knew she wouldn't be approved for the position. I sat in my office looking at a framed quote on my wall. "The truth has a way of surfacing." My assistant knocked and entered with a stack of vendor contracts for review. Normal work that felt extraordinary because I was trusted to do it properly. Miranda was gone from my industry. Word travels fast in professional circles, and everyone knew what had happened, even if the details were confidential. She'd tried to reinvent herself in other fields, but a simple Google search brought up enough questions to scare away most employers. I never wanted revenge. I just wanted the truth to matter.